It is said that the hardest part about losing a loved one isn't having to say goodbye, but it's the process of learning how to live without that special someone in your life. It's like trying to move on with the feeling of a void that has a need to be filled. Meet Yamahara and his frail companion Miyagawa, close friends who are lingering upon an overwhelming sadness that has been infecting Yamahara for quite some time, and will be entertaining us with today's story when a good friend would offer something that could ease one's mind when it comes to losing a loved one. You see, Yamahara has been struggling with the hardship of losing Naoko, a loving girlfriend who had succumbed to a fatal illness, even after the illness had claimed Naoko's life. The following days for Yamahara had become overwhelmed with grief and absolute loneliness, like there was an incurable emptiness within his life. Which is why Yamahara had always found comfort within his dreams, where he would always find Naoko in his arms, embracing her warming and glowing presence before stepping back into a nightmarish reality of emptiness. Pretty much, life for Yamahara was lonely, sad, and empty. And thankfully, his famished-looking friend Miyagawa, the guy who looks like he hadn't slept in weeks, has the answer to Yamahara's problem. There's this place downtown, a secret gathering where guys can go and have fun and enjoy themselves. Definitely the kind of place that Miyagawa would say that it's worth checking out, especially for someone like Yamahara and his enduring hardship of losing Naoko. In fact, you can say that there's someone there who can definitely ease a man's grieving heart. That sometimes love may just come around in a different form, when you least expect it. But for today's story, it comes with a much sinister form. Somewhere in the back alleys of the city was supposed to be a cure for Yamahara's melancholy. Let's just say that if Miyagawa wasn't a close friend, Yamahara would have never found himself entertaining the idea of seeking a cure for his grieving sadness when visiting an exclusive gathering. You know, Yamahara had also begun noticing how Miyagawa wasn't himself lately. More distant than usual, almost like he was in a trance, like his mind was constantly fixated. Which is why in the back of Yamahara's mind, he'd assumed that he was going to find himself stepping into a gentleman's club, a lonely hearts club, or maybe a dingy bar. But when entering a room located on the 5th floor of some building downtown, well, let's just say that stepping into this room had Yamahara wishing that he'd found himself walking into a dingy bar of half-naked women. The room was packed with men of all ages, kneeling as if they were in preparation for some kind of worship service. Much like Miyagawa, they too were frail, famished, and dazed off within some kind of bizarre trance. In the far end of the room, facing the pathetic crowd, was a chair of crimson and gold, more like a throne that was flanked by 2 men, who seemed to be more presentable than the rest. And when the crowd had begun to fill the room with their shouting, well, more like desperate cries for a Tomie, that was when she had entered the room, the queen of this strange domain. Even her body language had defined her as a goddess that was being idolized by this crowd of male peasants. She was unlike anything that Yamahara had seen before, like physical beauty that could only be described with perfection and precision, flawless in every way. Even the atmosphere in this room, you could easily tell that she had this strange dominance over the crowd as they continuously showered her with desperate chants. And with the men screaming her name, not even the pathetic display of worship had shown any satisfaction with their demeanor. And yet, Yumahara knew that she was definitely reveling the pathetic scene. After the crowd had went silent, when she had given the two men who were flanking her chair a hand to kiss, you could see the enjoyment she had with the pitiful display of jealousy amongst the crowd as they gazed upon the very thing they've long desired, sadistically amusing herself by taunting and teasing her male worshippers. Even when she would be catered by a dish of caviar and foie gras, not even being spoiled with the offerings of high-class dining was enough to sway this girl from her vile treatment towards her male followers. Pretty much, watching this bizarre freak show from the back of the room was enough to give Yumahara that strong sense of cringe-worthy discomfort. Whatever the hell kind of gathering this was, it was definitely something that Yumahara had no interest in, especially the spoiled princess who was running the show. But before Yumahara would find himself heading towards the exit, that was when his close friend would reap the promises of being personally rewarded by offering this queen something that she had been demanding from her followers. A stud who's worth her time, a cool friend for her to play with. And that was when the entire room had ceased its bizarre display of worship and all eyes were now centered on Yumahara. It was like Yumahara was being haunted by a darkened cloud of desperation, envy, and spite. And it was within the midst of this unseen cloud where the eyes of forbidden comfort was making their way towards Yumahara. It was hard for him to look away from her. It was like she was somehow trying to infect Yumahara's thoughts with an inner desire of wanting to be swept away, wanting her to fulfill every lustful thought that had dwelled in the back of his mind, while being surrounded by the swarming eyes of desperation, intense jealousy that were giving Yumahara a strong sense of unexpected danger. The girl was mesmerizing, giving Yumahara temptations of submitting his love for her. But at the same time, there was the inner pleas of hoping that this girl would have no interest within him. This was wrong. This was not a cure for a grieving loss. This was a lustful disease, an unseen evil. And just as she began warming herself up to her new guest, offering to bring Yumahara into her private domain for a special introduction to this special gathering, that was when Yumahara had done the unthinkable, well, more like the impossible, by refusing to waste a minute longer of participating within this display of madness, and leave the place as the only man who would deny this spoiled and wretched princess from her venomous need for male worship. Later that night, when Yumahara had moved on from the strange incident downtown, going through one of his moments of embracing the warming memories with Naoko, helping him to ease his thoughts from the vile woman and her worshippers, Yumahara would have never expected that a late-night visit from Miyagawa, knocking on the door with the intent of apologizing for what had happened, would end up with his close friend and a small army of followers kidnapping Yumahara because of how their queen had taken a special fancy with the grieving man. It's practically the nature of man to love something like Tomie, that there should not be a man alive who cannot resist her cruel device of bringing a man to his knees. Which brings Tomie an interesting curiosity. Why is it that this one man, who Tomie finds to be the most attractive among the endless stream of pathetic men she would see on a daily basis, would easily deny his love for her, with no hesitation? Even the offering of granting this Yumahara, the very thing that most men are not worthy of, would not even shake his reluctance towards the inner feelings he has for Tomie. Oh, she knows that somewhere deep within the mind of Yumahara, he wants her, he desires her, and yet with this queen among men being only a single confession away from claiming her ultimate prize. This Yumahara had somehow done the impossible by refusing to surrender to those urges. No man has that kind of willpower, which begs the question, what makes this Yumahara so special? But then again, sometimes breaking a man's willpower may take more time, which now leaves Tomie with a different question. Maybe the following day, or even the day after. Will this Yumahara come to love her? But when Tomie had begun finding her curiosity being hounded by harsh criticism and disapproval, the idea that this man would rather question the young age of this queen rather than embracing his love for her, demonizing her dreadful actions, and even questioning the men that she surrounds herself with. What Yumahara truly saw within this Tomie was not a goddess, not a queen nor a celebrity, nothing special but just some spoiled, pampered teenage princess who's now realizing that she truly can't have everything she wants. And not only were these the words of truth and honesty, but the dangerous kind of words that had put Yumahara in a very bad situation when he was thrown into the crowd of pitiful worshippers, outraged by this one man who would dare insult their beautiful queen, their beloved Tomie. This man who would have the audacity to belittle their beloved Tomie, defining her as nothing more but some immature, good-for-nothing hussy. For that is the reason why this Yumahara needed to be taught a lesson. A very harsh and painful lesson. It was always a beautiful day when Yumahara would have the chance to hold Naoko in his arms. Oh, how she would always glow with that beautiful smile of hers, just washing away all the misery and sadness that had been infecting his soul. It was always this small moment of slumber that had somehow given Yumahara strength, the hope he needed to move on with his life. Naoko had many friends. Someone who was beautiful, kind, adored, and loved by so many. And as this moment of blissful happiness had begun to wither away, bringing Yumahara back into this horrible nightmare that we can call reality, before him was Tomie, who seemed to be fascinated with Yumahara's moment of slumbering peace. For 2 days straight, Yumahara's display of unconscious slumber had given Tomie an interesting display of entertainment, that this stubborn man who has been denying his lustful feelings for Tomie is capable of loving someone. A special someone that his delirium had revealed to be a girl named Naoko. Unbelievable. How a man would devote his love to a dead girl, rather than embracing his love for a live one. Sometimes it may take more than good looks to bring a stubborn man to his knees. Maybe if he were to find himself being thrown into a role as a noble protector, a special knight in shining armor who would sweep Tomie away from her world of misery, saving a damsel in distress from a group of foul men who cannot keep their eyes away from her, hounding her with such perverted and dreadful thoughts, that if this man can just share an ounce of empathy for Tomie, and help her escape from this godforsaken prison. It's just that it's too bad that Yumahara doesn't feel like helping a victim who acts like an abusive queen towards her captors. Which has this worthless man asking a new question, a better question. Why is it that Tomie is trying so hard to seduce this man? I bet we already forgot about Yumahara's good friend, Miyagawa, who was promised a special reward for giving Tomie a new plaything that was worth her time. His reward was to have fun by looking after Yumahara, playing babysitter. And even though Yumahara isn't too happy that his close friend would do something like this, destroying a friendship because of some spoiled princess who obviously has no interest with Miyagawa or any of the other men, Yumahara definitely knows that there's something unnatural with this girl. How long have these people been under her control? Since the day he was kidnapped, Yumahara had never seen Miyagawa or any of the other men sleep or eat, doing nothing but humbling themselves before this princess, demoralizing and humiliating themselves for her twisted idea of entertainment. People don't normally act like this. Even his close friend Miyagawa, this was definitely unlike him. Even when hearing Miyagawa sharing his overwhelming love for Tomie, the way he would describe it was something far more disturbing than obsession. Like there was a supernatural fixation he had with Tomie that just kept getting worse, giving him such horrible thoughts when fantasizing himself with Tomie, that if she was his, Miyagawa had a dwelling fear that he may do something unthinkable. He doesn't know why, but there are these urges to kill Tomie. In fact, Miyagawa fears that even ripping Tomie apart may not be enough to satisfy his love for her. Even when looking amongst the crowd of her male followers, you could tell that the other guys were also feeling the same thing. It's like every minute, the atmosphere kept getting more tense, more dangerous. Like every man was just waiting for that single opportunity to take Tomie for his own, to feed their sickened fantasy, like a powder keg just waiting to explode any minute. That's why Miyagawa has been bringing a knife to the gathering. Kinda helps him with his urges, anticipating the grand moment where his fantasy becomes a bloody reality. Just waiting to give his beautiful queen a wonderful horror show in private. As always, the weather was warm, peaceful, a day that had never faded its natural expression of peace and calmness, never failing its purpose of giving Yumahara his limited escape from the horrible nightmares within the waking world. And amongst the crowd of loving friends was the glowing angel of these dreams, the ever so beautiful Naoko, a radiant comfort that was now being engulfed by a familiar darkness, an evil that had begun filling the skies of this blissful dream with a scream, forcing the helpless Yumahara into witnessing his beloved Naoko being consumed by a gathering of friends who had an intense love for her, an evil love for his beautiful Naoko. It was the screams of a queen that had disrupted Yumahara's dreadful moment of slumber, thrown into a reality where a new nightmare was about to unfold. It was finally happening. The obsessive love that these men had for Tomie, the very thing that had been filling the atmosphere with violent anticipation, was now erupting, leaving Tomie at the mercy of her group of male peasants, men who had spent weeks of being on their knees for this woman, willing participants for her overwhelming beauty, victims of a cruel device that had driven each of them into losing more than their dignity and pride, but their humanity. Now, all that's left of this gathering were just a group of broken men whose minds are being driven with murderous intent, and just seconds away from having their hands upon their queen, almost fulfilling their sickened fantasies. If it wasn't for a stroke of luck, a small opportunity for Tomie to make a narrow escape, and make the hopeless effort of hiding within her chambers alongside with her prized captor. This time, the fear within Tomie's pleas for help were now real. That the terror waiting outside the door had given her a surreal understanding of the horrifying situation. And even though freeing Yumahara from his state of captivity Not even Yumahara's noble efforts of having Tomie making her escape through the veranda will be enough for the inevitable nightmare, especially with Miyagawa standing between Tomie and her only chance to be free from facing a violent and savage fate. If Miyagawa remembered correctly, wasn't there supposed to be a personal reward for his devotion? That playing babysitter would be sufficient enough for sacrificing his friendship with Yumahara? Oh no. After everything he had given to this woman, of all people, should it be Miyagawa who deserves this glorious moment with Tomie? To enjoy the thrill of being the one who can express his true love for Tomie by taking her life, ripping her limb from limb. And even though Yumahara had prevented Miyagawa from fulfilling his sadistic urges, not even Tomie's knight in shining armor was enough to stop the other followers from barging into the room, finally getting the chance to get their hands on their precious queen. Like a swarm of starving dogs pouncing on their helpless prey, throwing themselves onto each other, creating a pile of bloodthirsty animals, desperately trying to reach for their precious Tomie. Amidst this shocking scene, Yumahara will never forget how there was no screaming. That for only a few seconds, in the heart of this pile of followers, Yumahara would gaze upon her eyes, witnessing a fearless Tomie staring at him before being swallowed by her loving worshippers. Till this day, Yumahara will never forget her eyes, how they alone would slowly reveal the sinister truth behind this horror show. Because they were not the eyes of terror. What Yumahara saw behind those beautiful, piercing eyes was something that was pure evil. My God, what if Tomie knew that this was going to happen? That she wanted this to happen? And when Yumahara began hearing the painful screams of one of the men being accidentally stabbed, and then another, and then another, and another. That was when Yumahara had begun to understand. This whole knight in shining armor failing to save the damsel in distress. It had to be an act. I know it may sound crazy, unbelievable, but watching her being consumed by this pile of men who were bewitched with murderous intent, literally stabbing and gutting each other because of their desperate attempt to kill Tomie. What Yumahara was seeing was nothing but a pile of shifting bodies that was turning itself into a mound of violated flesh and blood. Kinda makes you wonder that what if this was all for Yumahara? A mass suicide for a stubborn man who refused to share his love for Tomie. Seeing how Yumahara has a thing for dead girls, would he finally come to love Tomie if she were dead too? To be quite honest, kinda makes you wonder if it actually worked. Well, that was an unexpected story. Whoever knew that joining the Tomie fan club would be so interesting? Must have been quite a story to share when Yumahara had to drag the police back to the horrible scene. Even though there were no bodies, nothing but a room where its floor, the walls, the ceiling were literally covered with blood, leaving behind nothing but the strange disappearance of several men, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this very day. As for Tomie, well, even though Yumahara still believes that somehow, somewhere in the world, she's still alive, all I can say is that every time when Yumahara has one of his blissful dreams, where he finds himself calling for his beloved Naoko, it isn't Naoko who's at his side. Instead, it's her, Tomie. And every time he would see Tomie, that's when they would come, Miyagawa and the other followers, desperately rushing to get their hands on their precious queen. So I guess in a strange way, our stubborn Yumahara had finally come to love Tomie after all. A love story with a happy ending.